All right, ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to welcome you for the second annual conference of the EU Tax Observatory. Thank you for being here, and thanks to our wonderful speakers and panelists. The European Union has delivered a bold and necessary response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to the war in Ukraine. The question today is simple. How do we democratically and equitably raise the resources that are so badly needed, not only to pay for this extraordinary effort, but also to invest in the future of our union, in education, in health, in infrastructure, in the transition to a zero-carbon economy? This is the central tax policy question for the coming month, and in fact for the coming years. And I'm so glad that we can have this conversation today and to think collectively about some of the main options. So what are these options? Number one, we could do a better job at taxing multinational companies. Of course, much has been done in the past few years. The OECD two-pillar agreement and its ongoing implementation in the European Union are really a milestone. It's the first international agreement that puts a floor to how low certain taxes can go. For decades, some of the most powerful economic actors booked hundreds of billions of euros and dollars in profits in places like Bermuda or the Cayman Islands, where the corporate tax rate, as you know, is a relatively modest rate of 0%. This will come to an end, and it's major progress, and we should rejoice. But it is also wholly insufficient. Policymakers in many countries, especially in the global south, feel rightfully that they do not stand to benefit from it. In particular, from the first pillar of the agreement, in which they placed high hopes. And indeed, the work by our EU Tax Observatory colleagues, Mona Barake and Elvin Lepoer, who published the first ever estimates of the potential net revenue gains of Pillar 1 in March, suggests that they're right. They're right, these policymakers, to be concerned. But second, and perhaps more fundamentally, the agreement does not fundamentally break with the logic of international tax competition, as the work of the observatory, again, in particular the work on substance carve-outs, has emphasized repeatedly. It is urgent that we break with that logic, because international tax competition is just a very negative form of international competition. It is zero-sum. The activities that some countries gain here are lost there. For the EU as a whole, for the world as a whole, it does not create value. But in fact, it's worse than that. It's a negative-sum process because it primarily benefits the most powerful economic actors, multinational companies, and their shareholders at the expense of everybody else. And so it just fuels inequality. Now, don't get me wrong, there will always be international competition. But as social scientists, as economists, as policymakers, we understand that there are positive forms of international competition and there are negative forms of competition. When countries compete to have the best universities, the best infrastructure, to be the first to arrive at net zero carbon emission, this is healthy, this is positive, because it benefits the planet as a whole. It benefits most of the population. When countries compete to lower the taxes on the most powerful economic actors, those who have most benefited from globalization, It does nothing of the sort. It does just the opposite. So we need to move towards more positive, sustainable forms of competition as soon as possible. We're going to explore what this means for the taxation of multinational companies in the first panel of the day. Second option on the table. We could do a better job at fighting tax avoidance, whether it's tax avoidance by multinational firms, of corporate taxes, of individual income taxes, or VAT. Fighting tax avoidance, as you know, it starts with measuring and understanding it. And here also the Observatory has done groundbreaking work. On tax avoidance by multinational firms, we published the first ever public database of country-by-country reports, which are the fundamental source to study profit shifting by multinational companies. We put new ideas on the map, for instance, on how to tax the excess profits of oil and gas companies stemming from the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, using new instruments that could minimize avoidance possibilities. We'll explore other options in this space during the keynote speeches and in the second panel of the day. Number 3, we should consider the different possible ways to increase the progressivity of our tax systems. And in the third panel of the day, we'll discuss one option that has received relatively less attention so far, although it's increasingly being discussed by policymakers all over the world. And that option is the idea of a progressive tax on net wealth. Now, of course, as you know, the European Union, EU member states, have a long experience in this area. Many EU countries have had progressive wealth taxes, in some cases dating back to the 19th century. Some still do. We need to learn from this history. We need to learn what worked well, and more importantly, what didn't work well, and many things didn't work well. And more importantly than that, we need to learn how the mistakes that were made can be fixed. So these are the defining challenges of the day: fostering positive forms of competition, fighting tax avoidance, inventing new forms of effective tax progressivity. We're not going to be able to provide definitive answers or proposals to any of these questions. Nobody can. The answers do not lie with anyone. They do not lie with any research group in particular, no matter their expertise. They can only be obtained through an inclusive and well-informed debate among citizens, through democratic deliberation and the vote. So our mission is modest. It is to inform this democratic debate. But modest as it is crucial for democracies. I look forward to a great conversation today. Thank you very much.